It is likely that most people think of the military as a bunch of muscular, patriotic, brave groups of people all throughout history. Many don't realize how much one's experience varies based on things such as branch of military, age, time period, and different conflicts going on at that time. Today, 4 brave students by the names of Ian Downey, Zach Sanders, Liam Deasing, and Tim Glezeski delve into the lives of military service members of all ages and experience levels, learning how different forms of service have led to incredible experiences and journeys throughout life.
Today we'll be exploring a wide range of aspects within the lives of these different veterans and active service members. We will be interviewing several people, discussing why they joined the military, what life in their specific branch is like, and personal experiences, among other things. We will explore the adventures they've been on, the feelings they've had about their work, and the lessons they've learned throughout their service.
Today we will begin today's podcast with an interview of Thomas Deasing. Deasing served in the United States National Guard from 1970 to 1976. During this time in the United States was heavily involved in the Vietnam War. However, Thomas and his branch of the National Guard were stationed here in the United States and assisted during disasters such as the tornado in 1975.
When you joined, what was the process of joining the National Guard like?
Oh, let's see, how old was I? I was probably...
We were engaged.
I was 21, and the process at the time was to just show interest. Vietnam was going on. There weren't very many openings in the National Guard. So if you could snag one, you just went and signed up at the Army. Basic training for the National Guardsmen at the time it's all very difficult. It was very strenuous, but being in the National Guard, we had been involved with the military for several months before we actually went to basic training. So we had a little bit of knowledge, military knowledge, before we went to basic.
Thomas reflects back on his training in order to join the National Guard and how it better prepared him for his life as a bridge platoon engineer.
Basically, they taught you how to handle a weapon, how to fire an M16, how to take it apart, how to put it back together, how to clean it. They taught you first aid. We were an engineer company, so we spent some of our time learning how to build bridges and do heavy equipment operation and things like that. But mostly, a lot of basic training was physical conditioning. And I was in a bridge platoon, and what our job was in the bridge platoon was to actually build bridges over whatever needed to have a bridge built over it. Like, say, if you were, the Army was, the company was traveling and they needed somebody blowing up a bridge and they needed a new bridge, we could build a bridge within a matter of hours.
Really? Being in the National Guard had a very strong effect on his family life. He was engaged to his now wife, who he married during his first year in the Guard, but he spent a weekend per month and several weeks during the summer on active duty. This was especially challenging when his wife became pregnant with their first son.
I would be gone for 2 weeks in the summer and 1 weekend every month, so it made it very difficult to plan things or to be able to attend some events, because you couldn't change it. Leaving my wife and children, after a while. After we finally had children. Your father. Mostly the 2 weeks in the summer was difficult because those 2 very long weeks. And of course with the Vietnam conflict, nobody really wanted to go into the regular Army. But I had the opportunity to join the Guard, and I'm glad I did because I learned a lot about other people. I met a lot of other people. I was able to help a lot of people and actually served a purpose why we were for that 6 years.
This is Blenda Downey. She was trained to be a field nurse in the Army. She never was in an active combat area, but was fully trained to be. This is her story and her experiences as an Army nurse. So, first of all, why did you join the Army?
I joined the Army because a friend of mine and I were seniors in nursing school, and we didn't have a plan for what we were going to do when we graduated. So we joined the Army Nurse Corps together as partners.
So what was training as a nurse like?
Training as a nurse was probably much different than it is today. A lot of our training generally for a nurse was in the hospital. We did a lot more practical experience nursing than the nurses today do. We were very well prepared to be nurses in the hospital.
What did you do on a daily basis in the hospital?
Do you mean the hospital itself or in the military?
In the military.
In the military, I did a regular hospital nursing course. I would go get up and do a regular shift every day. I worked with military officers, and I worked on the floor with the dependents of those officers or the wives of those officers. And I was on a medical surgical floor, so I took care of patients just like I would anywhere else if I was working as a nurse.
So were you part of a team or a group of people?
Yes, we worked. We had a head nurse, and then there were military nurses, but also civilian nurses who worked for the federal government who worked with us. We were a large team.
Army nurses were trained just like regular nurses and were given the same hospital environment, though they did active training simulations of operating in the field.
What are some of the experiences that you've had in the military?
The military was a real good experience. They trained you well. You could have advanced training. I was selected to be on one of the first teams that was going to work on the hearts. And one of my friends was so adamant about being a part of that team that I relinquished my spot for her.
That's nice.
It was a wonderful experience because we did the regular things. We would prepare by going out on bivouac and living in tents, so if there was ever a crisis, we could go to the field hospitals to work. But generally, as a nurse in the military, you do the same thing as a nurse would do in civilian life. Yes, it was a wonderful experience. I think any young person that wanted to go in the military to be a nurse would have good training and have a good experience. I was stationed in San Antonio, Texas, and El Paso, Texas, and really just fell in love with that climate and the people in that area.
Army nurses had a very different experience compared to other service members. Obviously, they were more focused on the medical aspects of combat and weren't given as rigorous basic training. Each nurse was just as dedicated as the next and worked their hardest to save lives.
Mr. Jonathan Kranick, who works at Creighton Prep, was a truck driver for a medical unit for the reserve forces in the United States during the Gulf War. However, he was never actually deployed overseas.
Okay, so you were a mechanic in the active reserve?
Yep, so what my official job was really a power generation repair specialist, but what you did is you learned how to lay out field hospitals and supply both electricity and sometimes air conditioning and things like that to field hospitals. But you didn't spend that much time doing that kind of stuff because once it was done, it's kind of done. And then you'd spend the rest of your time basically taking care of generators, and generators are all driven by diesel motors. And so once you learn the diesel motor, you can then fix trucks and things like that. So, but that was my official job. It's just a lot easier to say mechanic.
Like, did you have like a specific group or regiment name?
So I was in the 82nd Field Hospital, which was a reserve hospital here in town. They were part of, I think, something called the 89th ARCOM, which was like a regional Army Reserve Command based out of Kansas. And our base or our unit was down on 21st and Woolworth, so if you go down there, you'll still see some stuff right there by the railroad. And then that particular unit, that set of buildings down there was also, and might still be, the kind of official place to take your truck in this area for the Army Reserve and National Guard. I can't remember what it was called, but they were active reservists down there, so they were not just the once a month kind of soldiers. They were there all the time. My boss, Sergeant Pate, he was in the active reserve, and so he was there year round, and that was why during the Gulf War I was able to go be on active reserve for a little while down there, as opposed to going overseas.
Koenig was originally meant to be sent to Germany in order to drive trucks for the reserve forces there. However, the Gulf War ended before he could get the chance.
No, I got the short story behind that is one day a good friend of mine, Mike Fingerland, was also a Delta mechanic, and he and I both got a call from Sergeant Pate about volunteering to go over because they were going to call the rest of the unit soon. And he said, but I got word of an outfit, I think at the time it was maybe in Germany, that they needed truck drivers. And so he said, I think I can get you guys a spot on that list if you'd rather do that than go to Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or wherever. And at the time I was pretty young and it didn't really make any difference. So, but I thought, well, heck, I'd rather go drive a truck in Germany than go to the desert, because I had a lot of friends over there that they were not infantry or anything like that, but they were in the desert, and it didn't sound fun. So we volunteered, and for about 2 weeks I thought I was going to Germany, but then the war ended. Well, it didn't officially end, but it kind of unofficially ended.
Was like any you think like it has changed in recent years? Like you think there's any improvements that have been done? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I really don't know. I could only assume, yes, that it probably has changed a little bit. I think if I were 17 again,
Yeah.
And considering joining the military, it would be maybe a different choice because of I mean, we've got, I believe, 8 active conflicts right now in the last 8 or 10 years. And some of them.
Koenig learned a lot during his time as a truck driver and mechanic for the reserve forces and became well versed in repairing special equipment. He met many new people and enjoyed the service that he did for his country greatly.
Through hearing the stories of these men and women who served in the military, we have learned quite a bit about the less well-known positions within the American military.
We learned about the training and jobs found within the National Guard through Thomas Deasing, the skills required to be a field medic through the words of Glenda Downey, and the things one can learn through being a reserve army mechanic through the words of Jonathan Koenig.
I feel it's very important that we learn about those who have not only served in the more well-known branches, such as the Navy and Air Force, because sometimes many can forget about the less well-known or discussed benches and jobs. That said, we are so thankful to these people who were able to tell us their stories and give us more insight on their lives.
Songs used are Truckin' by Grateful Dead, Grayish Tapering Ash by Bell Moria, and Wind and Sea by Bell Moria.